The afternoon sun painted the Avenida de Mayo in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the marble sidewalks that stretched like ribbons of light through the heart of Buenos Aires. Valentina Rossi stood before the window of Caffè Tortoni, her reflection merging with the elegant interior visible through the glass. The small golden and ivory hearing device in her left ear caught the light, glinting like the jewelry it was designed to resemble. She adjusted her green Musco dress, smoothing the fabric with gloved hands, and stepped inside. The cafe hummed with the sounds of clinking porcelain, murmured conversations, and the rustle of newspapers. Valentina moved through it all with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to navigate the world through observation rather than sound. Or so everyone believed. She found her usual table near the window, where she could watch the parade of carriages and pedestrians outside, while appearing absorbed in her own silent world. A waiter approached, and she pointed to the menu with a polite smile, gesturing for her usual café con leche. He nodded with that mixture of pity and awkward gentleness that she had grown accustomed to over the years. 6 months ago, that expression might have been warranted, but now, as he walked away, she heard every word he muttered to his colleague. Poor thing. So young and beautiful, but trapped in that silence. Valentina's fingers tightened around her parasol handle. The weight of her secret pressed against her chest like a physical thing. For 6 months she had been living a lie, continuing to wear the device, continuing to pretend she couldn't hear the whispered conversations, the casual cruelties, the unguarded truths that people spoke freely in her presence. It had started as an accident, really. Her hearing had returned gradually, so subtly that she hadn't immediately realized the full extent of her recovery. By the time she understood, she had already learned too much. She had discovered that her cousin Mariana, who visited weekly with tears of sympathy, was secretly trying to convince Valentina's father to declare her incompetent and seize control of her inheritance. She had learned that the charitable ladies who invited her to their gatherings did so only to feel superior. Their kindness, a performance for an audience they believed couldn't hear their mockery. She had overheard Eduardo Villa, her persistent suitor, telling his friends that marrying a deaf woman would be ideal since she couldn't argue or contradict him. The truth was intoxicating and terrible. It gave her power, but it also isolated her in a prison of her own making. Every day the lie grew heavier, yet every day she found another reason to maintain it. "May I join you?" The voice startled her from her thoughts. She looked up to find a man standing beside her table, his tall frame silhouetted against the afternoon light streaming through the window. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal grey suit with a burgundy silk cravat, his black hair gleaming with pomade. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark and intense, with a warmth that seemed genuine rather than pitying. He gestured to the empty chair across from her, then, to her surprise, signed the question in fluid, practiced movements. "May I sit?" Valentina's heart skipped. Men didn't learn sign language for strangers. She nodded, gesturing to the chair with what she hoped was the right amount of shy uncertainty. He sat down with elegant ease, placing his top hat and silver-handled walking stick on the table's edge. "I'm Alessandro de Cordoba," he said aloud while simultaneously signing. "I've recently returned to Buenos Aires after many years abroad. I saw you here last week and, forgive my boldness, but I asked the cafe owner about you." She tilted her head, making her expression quizzical, and reached for the small leather notebook she always carried. In careful script she wrote, "Valentina Rossi. You sign very well." Alessandro's smile transformed his entire face. softening the aristocratic severity of his features. "I learned in Paris. I had a friend there, a brilliant mathematician who was deaf. He taught me that communication transcends sound." He paused, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Would you permit me to write to you? I find myself quite captivated by the idea of getting to know you." Over the following weeks, letters arrived at the Rossi residence with clockwork regularity. Alessandro's handwriting was bold and expressive, his words even more so. He wrote about his travels through Europe, his thoughts on literature and science, his observations of Buenos Aires society, with the sharp wit of someone who saw its absurdities clearly. He asked her questions, real questions, about her opinions on books, her views on the changing city, her dreams for the future. Valentina found herself responding with unprecedented honesty. On paper, away from the performance of her daily life, she could be herself in ways she hadn't been in years. Their correspondence became the brightest part of her days. Each letter a revelation, each response an act of courage. But it was their encounters in person that truly undid her. Alessandro courted her publicly, a statement of intent that sent ripples through Buenos Aires society. He took her walking through the Jardins de Palermo, where the jacarandas bloomed in clouds of purple and the air smelled of roses and spring grass. He escorted her to the plaza outside Teatro Callan, where they watched the elite arrive for opera performances, the ladies' gowns catching the gaslight like jewels, the men in their stark black evening wear. On a particularly warm afternoon in November, they walked along the Puerto Madero waterfront. The Rio de la Plata stretched before them, its waters catching the golden light of late afternoon. Ships from around the world crowded the docks, their masts creating a forest of lines against the sky. The smell of salt water mixed with the scent of cargo, coffee, and tobacco, and exotic spices. Alessandro had been quiet for several minutes, unusual for him. Valentina watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hand gripped his walking stick a bit too tightly. Finally, he stopped walking and turned to face her, positioning himself so that his back was to the promenade, giving them a semblance of privacy despite the public setting. He began to speak, but not in her direction. He spoke to the water, to the ships, to the horizon. "She's unlike anyone I've ever known," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the sounds of the port. "Not despite her silence, but because of everything she is. The way she sees the world, the intelligence in those green eyes, the strength it must take to navigate a society that sees her as less than whole when she is, in fact, more complete than most of them could ever hope to be." Valentina's breath caught in her throat. He thought she couldn't hear him. He was speaking his heart to the wind, believing his words would remain his alone. "I came back to Buenos Aires to settle my affairs and return to Europe, but now I find I can't imagine leaving. I can't imagine a future that doesn't include her laughter, which I've glimpsed only once, when a child in the plaza did something amusing, and she forgot to hide it. I can't imagine mornings without wondering what she might write to me, evenings without hoping to see her at some gathering." He turned back to her then, and she quickly arranged her features into an expression of patient curiosity, as if she'd been watching the ships and waiting politely for him to finish his private contemplation. He smiled and signed, "Forgive me. I was wool gathering. Shall we continue?" As they walked, Valentina felt the guilt pressing down on her like a physical weight. This man, this good, genuine man who had learned an entire language to communicate with her, who wrote her poetry and treated her as an intellectual equal, who spoke such beautiful truths when he believed she couldn't hear them, was falling in love with a lie. That evening, she sat in her bedroom at the Rossi family's Recoleta mansion, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror. The hearing device glinted in the lamplight. Her maid had already left for the night, and the house was settling into its evening quiet. She reached up and carefully removed the device, setting it on the polished wood surface. Without it, she looked different, less fragile, less defined by absence, just herself. A knock at her door made her jump. "Valentina?" Her best friend Beatrice's voice came through the wood. "May I come in?" "Yes," Valentina called, her voice carrying clearly through the air. Beatrice entered, closing the door behind her. She was the only person who knew the truth, the only one Valentina had trusted with her secret. Her blonde curls were escaping from their pins, her blue eyes worried. "You were with him again today," Beatrice said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I saw you both at the port. Valentina, you can't keep doing this. That man is falling in love with you, I know." Valentina's voice was barely a whisper. "Then tell him the truth. He's not like the others. You've heard how he speaks about you, how he defends people who are different, how he challenges the narrow thinking of our society. Don't you think he would understand? Understand that I've been deceiving him from the moment we met. That every time he carefully signs to me, every time he writes instead of speaks, he's accommodating a disability that no longer exists. That I've been eavesdropping on his private thoughts." Valentina shook her head. "How could anyone forgive that? How can you build a life on a lie?" Beatrice countered gently. "If he proposes, what then? Will you marry him and continue this pretense forever?" The question haunted Valentina through the sleepless night that followed. She stood at her window, watching the gaslights flicker along the street below, and wondered what she truly wanted: the safety of her deception, or the risk of being truly known. The next day brought an invitation that set Buenos Aires society abuzz. The influential Navarro family was hosting a reception in their gardens in Palermo, and attendance was considered essential for anyone of consequence. Valentina received her invitation with mixed feelings. Such events were exhausting performances, hours of maintaining her facade while navigating conversations conducted through notebooks and exaggerated gestures. But Alessandro would be there. He had mentioned it in his last letter, saying he looked forward to seeing her among the roses. She chose her dress carefully, a gown of deep emerald silk that matched her eyes, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. Her maid arranged her dark hair in an elaborate updo, leaving a few tendrils to frame her face. The hearing device was secured in its usual place, a familiar weight that felt heavier than ever. The Navarro gardens were spectacular. The November springed in full bloom. Thousands of roses created walls of color, deep reds and soft pinks, pure whites and sunset oranges. Wrought iron pergolas dripped with wisteria, and the paths were lined with perfectly manicured hedges. String musicians played beneath a pavilion of iron and glass, their music drifting through the garden like a living thing. Valentina arrived with her parents, who immediately dispersed into the crowd, confident in their daughter's ability to navigate such gatherings in her own way. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began her usual routine of circulating slowly, allowing people to acknowledge her with nods and smiles that required no response. "Senorita Rossi." The voice made her turn. Eduardo Villa stood before her, his brown suit impeccable, his waxed moustache gleaming. The monocle he affected dangled from its gold chain, catching the sunlight. His cold grey eyes held something she didn't like, a calculating sharpness that set her nerves on edge. She inclined her head politely, waiting for him to produce the notebook that most people carried specifically for communicating with her. Instead, he leaned closer than propriety allowed and spoke directly into her ear, his voice low. "I know your secret, Valentina." Ice flooded her veins, but she kept her expression neutral, giving him a quizzical look and pointing to her ear with an apologetic gesture. "Oh, don't trouble yourself with that performance," he said, louder now, but still pitched only for her. "I've been watching you for weeks. The way your eyes track conversations across a room, how you turn towards sounds before you should, perfect timing of your responses, even without seeing people's lips. You can hear it perfectly well, can't you?" Valentina's mind raced. She could deny it, maintain her facade, but the knowing smirk on Eduardo's face told her he was certain. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in public in 6 months. She spoke. "What do you want, Eduardo?" His smile widened, triumphant and ugly. "There she is, the real Valentina Rossi." He straightened, adjusting his vest with self-satisfied precision. "What I want is simple. You will accept my proposal of marriage, or I will expose your deception to all of Buenos Aires society. Imagine the scandal, the shame. Your family would never recover. And that Spanish duke who's been sniffing around will learn that the noble cause of loving a disabled woman was just your elaborate joke on all of us. I would never marry you." The words came out stronger than she felt. "And if you expose me, you'll have to explain why you've been obsessing over a woman who clearly despises you." "Despise me all you want," Eduardo said coldly, "but think carefully about your choice. You have until the end of this reception to give me your answer. After that, I start talking." He walked away, leaving Valentina standing frozen among the roses, their sweet perfume suddenly cloying. The garden spun around her, the laughter and music too loud, too bright. She set down her champagne glass. Before her shaking hands could drop it, "Valentina." Alessandro appeared at her side, his presence like an anchor in the storm. Concern etched lines around his eyes as he studied her face. He signed quickly, "Are you ill? You're pale." She shook her head, but couldn't form a response. Couldn't decide what language to use, couldn't remember which version of herself she was supposed to be. Alessandro made a decision. He took her elbow gently and guided her away from the main gathering, down a path that led to a quieter section of the garden. Here, the roses grew wild and abundant, climbing over stone walls in cascades of crimson and gold. A small fountain burbled in the center of a secluded courtyard, providing a screen of sound that offered genuine privacy. He positioned himself in front of her, his hands coming up to cup her face with extraordinary gentleness. "What happened?" He signed one-handed, his voice accompanying the gesture. "You're trembling." The tenderness in his touch, the genuine concern in his eyes. The way he was trying so hard to communicate with her, in the way he believed she needed. It was too much. The lie was too heavy. She couldn't carry it anymore, not with him, not when he looked at her like she was something precious. "Alessandro," she said, her voice clear and steady in the garden air, "I can hear you." He froze, his hands still cradling her face, his eyes searching hers with sudden intensity. "What? I can hear you," she repeated, the words tumbling out now, unstoppable. "I've been able to hear for 6 months. The device, the silence, it's all been a pretense. I recovered my hearing gradually, and by the time I realized I could hear everything, I had already learned so much about how people really felt about me. So, I kept the secret. I kept pretending because it gave me power, because it protected me, because it let me see the truth of people's hearts." Alessandro's hands dropped from her face, and he took a step back. His expression was unreadable, shock and confusion, and something else warring across his features. "You've been able to hear me this entire time." His voice was quiet, but she heard the hurt in it, sharp as broken glass. "Every word I've spoken." "Yes." Guilt crushed her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Every word, the letters, the sign language, the accommodations I made, ... He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its careful styling. "It was all unnecessary. You let me believe. You let me try so hard to bridge a gap that didn't exist." Valentina insisted, tears burning her eyes. "Just not the gap you thought. Alessandro, please understand. Before you, everyone who knew about my hearing loss treated me as less than human. They pitied me, or they dismissed me, or they saw me as an easy target. But you saw me. You saw me as complete, as worthy, as interesting. And when I started to hear again, I discovered that the version of me you were getting to know was closer to who I really am than anyone else had ever gotten. How can I believe anything you say?" The pain in his voice cut her deeper than anger would have. "How do I know which parts of you are real and which are performance? Because the woman who writes to you is real," she said desperately. "The thoughts I share, the opinions I express, the person I am with you, is the truest version of myself I've ever been. The only lie was the device. Everything else was honest. You heard me at the port yesterday. It wasn't a question." His jaw tightened as understanding dawned. "When I was speaking to myself, or so I thought." "You heard every word?" "Yes." The admission felt like tearing open her own chest. "And it was beautiful, Alessandra. Everything you said was beautiful. It made me realize how wrong I was to continue deceiving you. That's why I'm telling you now. Why I can't keep lying anymore. Because your conscience finally caught up with you." There was an edge of bitterness now. "Or because that bastard Eduardo Villa is blackmailing you." Her surprise must have shown on her face, because Alessandro's expression hardened further. "I heard him," he said. "I was approaching from the other path and heard his threats. I was coming to defend you when you spoke." His hands clenched at his sides. "How long has he known?" "He just figured it out. He's given me until the end of this reception to accept his marriage proposal, or he'll expose me to everyone." "And what were you going to do?" "I don't know." The words came out as almost a cry. "I don't know anymore, Alessandro. All I know is that I can't keep living this lie. Not with you. Not when you've been so genuine. So kind. So completely yourself. You deserve the truth. The truth." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The truth is that I fell in love with you. The real you, I thought. The woman I saw beneath the surface, the brilliant mind, the observant soul, the courage I believed it took to live in your silent world. But now I don't know what was real and what was performance. I don't know if the woman I love even exists." "She exists," Valentina whispered, tears finally spilling over. "She exists, Alessandro. I'm right here. Flawed and foolish, and so very sorry, but real." He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him struggling. Could see the war between his heart and his hurt playing across his face. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I was going to do this today," he said quietly, opening the box to reveal a ring, a single perfect emerald surrounded by diamonds. "I had this whole plan. I was going to bring you to this very spot, and I was going to carefully, respectfully remove your hearing device, because I wanted you to focus only on my hands as I signed my proposal. I wanted it to be intimate, just between us, in the language I learned for you." Valentina's heart shattered. "Alessandro, but you would have heard every word anyway, wouldn't you? You would have known what I was going to say before I said it, just like you always have. My grand romantic gesture would have been just another moment where you played your role, where you pretended to be moved by something you already knew was coming. Don't, she pleaded. Please don't reduce what we have to that. Yes, I would have heard you, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't have been moved. That doesn't mean your words wouldn't have mattered. The way you think about me, the way you see me, the effort you put into every interaction. All that matters, Alessandro. All of that is real. He closed the ring box with a decisive snap. Is it? Or is it just more comfortable than the alternative? You say you kept the secret because it gave you power, because it protected you. But what you really mean is that it was easier to hide than to be vulnerable, easier to observe than to be seen. You talk about how people treated you when they knew about your disability, but at least they were treating the real you, even if they did it badly. With me, you've been hiding behind a mask this entire time. That's not fair. Anger flared through her grief. You don't know what it's like, Alessandro. You don't know what it's like to be dismissed your entire life, to have your thoughts and feelings discounted because people assume you're not quite complete. You don't know what it's like to discover that the moment people think you can't hear them, they reveal their true selves, and those selves are often cruel. I didn't keep this secret to hurt you. I kept it because I was afraid. Afraid of what? He challenged. Afraid I would be like them. Afraid I wouldn't love you anymore if you could hear. 'Cause if that's what you think of me, then you don't know me at all. I'm afraid of losing this. The words burst from her with raw honesty. I'm afraid of losing the way you look at me, the way you talk to me like I'm your equal, the way you share your thoughts and dreams. I'm afraid that if the accommodation goes away, so does the attention. I'm afraid that I'll just be another woman in a drawing room, unremarkable and uninteresting. I'm afraid that the thing that made me special to you was the very thing I've been lying about. Alessandro's expression shifted, some of the anger draining away to be replaced by a deep sadness. The thing that made you special to me was you, Valentina. Your mind, your observations, the way you see the world. I learned sign language and wrote letters because I wanted to communicate with you in ways that have felt comfortable and natural for you, not because I fetishized your disability. If you recovered your hearing, I would have been happy for you. I would have celebrated with you. But you didn't give me that chance. You didn't trust me enough to let me prove who I really am. The truth of his words settled over her like a weight. He was right. She had been so focused on protecting herself that she hadn't stopped to consider what she was denying him. The chance to show her that his feelings were real, regardless of how she communicated. You're right, she said softly. I should have told you the moment I realized I could hear again. I should have trusted you. And I'm sorry, Alessandro. I'm so desperately sorry. He looked at the ring box in his hand, then back at her. I need time, he said finally. I need to think about this, about us, about whether we can build something real from this foundation of lies. I understand. She did, even though it felt like her heart was being torn from her chest. And you need to handle Eduardo Villar, Alessandro added, his voice hardening, because regardless of what happens between us, I won't let that pompous fool blackmail you. What do you mean? A fierce protectiveness flashed in his dark eyes. I mean that I'm going to take care of it. Trust me on this, at least. Before she could respond, he turned and strode back toward the main gathering, leaving her alone among the roses, with tears streaming down her face and her world crumbling around her. Valentina forced herself to breathe, to wipe her tears, to arrange her features into some semblance of composure. She couldn't fall apart here, not now. She made her way back through the garden on shaking legs, dreading what she would find. The reception was in full swing, the garden crowded with Buenos Aires society at its most glamorous. She spotted Eduardo immediately, standing with a group of men near the pavilion, that smug expression still on his face. But before she could approach him, she saw Alessandro intercept the group. She couldn't hear what was being said from this distance, but she could see Eduardo's expression change from smug to uncertain to alarm. Alessandro spoke calmly, but there was something in his posture, in the way he dominated the space, despite being surrounded by other men, that commanded attention. One by one, the other men began to drift away, until it was just Alessandro and Eduardo. Valentina moved closer, drawn by a need to know what was happening. She positioned herself behind a rose-covered trellis, where she could hear but remain hidden. "You will leave Valentina Rossi alone," Alessandro was saying, his voice low and dangerous. "You will forget whatever delusions you've constructed about her, and you will certainly never threaten her again." "Or what?" Eduardo blustered, but there was fear in his voice now. "You'll call me out? Duel me? This isn't the medieval age, Dark Cordoba. No, it's much simpler than that." Alessandro's voice was silk over steel. "I'll ruin you. You see, unlike you, I actually have connections in this city. Real connections, not just the pretense of them. I know where your family's money comes from, Eduardo. I know about the doctored ledgers, the bribes to port officials, the goods that disappear before they can be taxed. I know because I've made it my business to know everything about the men who circulate in these circles. And if you ever threaten Valentina again, if you so much as speak her name in any context other than the utmost respect, I will ensure that every influential person in Buenos Aires knows it too." Eduardo's face had gone white. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Shall we test that theory?" "I'm happy to start making calls tomorrow. The Navarros are close friends of my family. The Casa Rosada receives my correspondence regularly. Or perhaps we should start with your creditors. I imagine they'd be very interested to learn that your solvency is built on fraud. This is blackmail," Eduardo spat. "Yes," Alessandro agreed calmly. "It is. Ironic, isn't it? But here's the difference between us, Eduardo. I'm doing this to protect someone who deserves protection. You were doing it to force a woman into a marriage she didn't want. So yes, I'm blackmailing you, and I'm not the least bit ashamed of it. Now, are we clear?" Eduardo glared at him, his jaw working, but finally he gave a curt nod. "Crystal. Excellent." Alessandro's voice warmed slightly, though the steel remained underneath. "I'm so glad we understand each other. Now, I believe you have somewhere else to be. Anywhere else, in fact." Eduardo turned and stalked away, his posture rigid with humiliated fury. Alessandro watched him go, then turned directly toward Valentina's hiding place. His eyes found hers through the roses, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the garden. Then he walked away in the opposite direction, leaving her once again alone. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Valentina made her excuses and left early, pleading a headache that wasn't entirely false. Her parents were understanding, accustomed to their daughter's need to retreat from overwhelming social situations. They had no idea that her overwhelm had nothing to do with her disability and everything to do with her breaking heart. That night, she stood in her bedroom once again, the hearing device in her hands. But this time, when she looked at it, she didn't see protection or power. She saw a prison of her own making. She had been so afraid of being vulnerable, so afraid of being hurt. that she had hurt the one person who had tried to truly see her. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Valentina," Beatrice's voice called softly. "Come in." Beatrice entered, her expression sympathetic. She had clearly heard about the scene at the reception, the way gossip spread through their social circle. "I heard Alessandro threatened Eduardo Villar. The whole party was talking about it, though no one seems to know exactly what was said. He protected me," Valentina said quietly. "Even after I told him the truth, even though he's hurt and angry, he protected me from Eduardo's blackmail." "That's because he loves you," Beatrice said gently, sitting beside her on the bed. "Real love doesn't disappear just because there's conflict. It means working through the hard parts. I don't know if you'll forgive me." "Neither do you," Beatrice pointed out. "But you won't know unless you give him space to figure it out, and give yourself space to figure out who you really want to be. Not the deaf Valentina, not the hearing Valentina, just Valentina." Her friend's words stayed with her through another sleepless night. By the time dawn broke over Buenos Aires, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Valentina had made her decision. She didn't wear the hearing device. She dressed carefully in a simple day dress of pale blue and arranged her hair in a less elaborate style than usual. Without the device, her left ear felt strange, exposed, but also free. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked so different, but because, for the first time in years, she was seeing herself completely. At breakfast, her parents noticed immediately. "Valentina?" Her mother's voice was sharp with concern. "Where is your device?" "I don't need it anymore, Mama," Valentina said, her voice clear. "My hearing returned 6 months ago. I've been able to hear for quite some time." The silence that followed was deafening in its own way. Her father set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care, his face unreadable. Her mother's hand flew to her throat, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and then something that looked like hurt. 6 months. Her mother's voice trembled. "You've been lying to us for 6 months." "I have," Valentina admitted, "and I'm sorry for that. But I needed you to know the truth. I needed to stop hiding." What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of her life. Her parents demanded explanations, expressed hurt and confusion, struggled to understand why she would maintain such a deception. But, as Valentina explained, as she shared her fears and her discoveries about how people truly saw her, something shifted. "People can be cruel," her father said finally, his stern expression softening slightly. "Especially in our circles, where weakness is currency and kindness is often performance. But Valentina, you are our daughter. Whatever your challenges, whatever your abilities, we would have supported you. I know that now," Valentina said softly. "But I had to figure it out for myself. I had to learn that hiding wasn't the same as protecting myself." Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "You're still our daughter. Nothing changes that." "Everything changes," Valentina corrected gently. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." Over the next week, Valentina began the difficult process of revealing her truth to Buenos Aires society. She attended gatherings without her device, spoke aloud instead of writing in notebooks, and weathered the storm of gossip and speculation that followed. Some people were understanding, others were scandalized, and still others felt betrayed by what they saw as her deception. She found she cared less than she expected. Eduardo Villar, true to Alessandro's warning, kept his distance. The rumors about his family's business dealings began to circulate quietly. Nothing proven, but enough to damage his reputation and make him far more concerned with salvaging his own position than bothering Valentine. But through it all, she didn't see Alessandro. He had made himself scarce from the usual social gatherings, and the one time she saw him across a plaza, he had simply tipped his hat politely and walked in the other direction. It hurt more than she wanted to admit, but she understood. She had asked him to trust her after she had broken his trust. That wasn't something that could be repaired with words alone. 2 weeks after the reception in the Palermo Gardens, Valentina received an unexpected visitor. She was in the family's drawing room, reading a book, when the butler announced Alessandro de Cordoba. Her heart leapt into her throat. She stood quickly, smoothing her skirts, and tried to compose herself as Alessandro entered the room. He looked tired, she noticed. There were shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. But he was impeccably dressed as always, and his expression was carefully neutral. "Thank you for seeing me," he said formally. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Never," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please, sit." They sat in chairs across from each other, a small table between them bearing a vase of fresh roses. The silence stretched for a moment, heavy, with everything unsaid. "I've been thinking," Alessandro began finally, "about what you said in the garden, about fear and vulnerability, and what it means to truly be seen." Valentina waited, hardly daring to breathe. "You were right that I don't know what it's like to be dismissed because of a disability," he continued. "I come from a position of privilege in many ways, but I do know what it's like to feel like you have to be someone you're not to be accepted. I spent years in Europe playing a role, being the exotic South American, the acceptable foreigner, the safe version of different. I learned to present only the parts of myself that people wanted to see." His eyes met hers, and she saw vulnerability there, raw and real. "So while I don't condone your deception, I think I understand it better now. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how, and I reacted badly because you hit on my deepest fear." "Which is," she asked softly, "that I am not enough as I am. That the real me, without accommodations or performances, isn't interesting enough to hold someone's attention." He smiled sadly. "You see, when you told me the truth, my first thought wasn't anger at your deception. It was terror that everything I had done to connect with you, all the effort I put into learning sign language and writing letters, was the only reason you tolerated my presence. That without that barrier to overcome, I would just be another boring aristocrat pursuing you." Valentina's eyes widened. "Alessandro, that's not true at all. The reason I fell for you had nothing to do with the accommodations. It was your mind, your kindness, your willingness to see me as complete. It was the way you spoke about art and literature, the way you challenged my thinking, the way you made me laugh in your letters. The sign language and the written notes were lovely, but they weren't why I cared about you." "I'm starting to understand that," he said quietly. "These past 2 weeks, I've been replaying every conversation we had, every letter we exchanged, and I realized that the woman I fell in love with was real. The thoughts you shared, the observations you made, the person you were with me, that it was authentic. The only false thing was the device." "It was false," Valentina agreed, "but it was also a shield I didn't know how to put down, until you made me want to." Alessandro leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "I spoke to your friend Beatrice yesterday. I hope you don't mind. I needed to understand better, and she was willing to explain what she went through, how people treated you, why you felt the need to maintain the pretense, even after your hearing returned." "She's a good friend," Valentina said softly. What did she tell you? Enough to make me ashamed of my initial reaction, he admitted. She told me about your cousin trying to have you declared incompetent, about the suitors who saw you as easy to control, about the charitable ladies who used you to feel superior. She helped me see that your deception wasn't about malice or manipulation. It was about survival in a world that didn't know how to see you as fully human. Tears pricked Valentina's eyes. I should have trusted you with the truth sooner. You deserved that. Perhaps, Alessandro said. But I also understand why you didn't. Trust isn't automatic, Valentina. It has to be earned, and it has to feel safe. I wish you had felt safe enough with me to tell me, but I can't fault you for protecting yourself. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the velvet ring box. Valentina's breath caught as he opened it, the emerald and diamond ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. I still want to ask you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I want to do it right this time. No performances, no grand gestures based on false assumptions. Just two people who have seen each other at their worst and their most vulnerable, and who choose each other anyway. He stood and crossed to where she sat, then knelt beside her chair. He didn't reach for her hearing device because there was no hearing device to reach for. Instead, he simply took her hand in his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Valentina Rossi, he said, looking directly into her green eyes. I love you. Not the version of you that you thought I wanted, not the performance, not the shield. I love the woman who is brave enough to admit her mistakes, strong enough to face the consequences of her choices, and real enough to let me see her completely. I love your intelligence, your observations, your humor, your complexity. I love that you challenge me and frustrate me and make me think differently about the world. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I know we have work to do to rebuild trust. I know it won't be easy, and there will be moments when we both stumble, but I believe we're worth the effort. So I'm asking you, with full knowledge of who you are and who I am, will you marry me? Valentina felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in weeks, they were tears of joy rather than grief. She slipped from her chair to kneel on the floor with him, bringing them to eye level. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, Alessandro, I will marry you. Not because you learned sign language or wrote beautiful letters, but because you see me, the real me, flaws and fears and all. Because you make me want to be brave enough to be seen. He smiled then, a genuine expression of pure happiness that transformed his entire face. With careful reverence, he slipped the ring onto her finger. The emerald gleamed against her skin, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her all along. It matches your eyes, he said softly. I saw it in a jeweler's shop on Cale, Florida, and knew immediately it was meant for you. It's beautiful, she whispered. Then, feeling bold, feeling free, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was their first kiss, tender and tentative and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. I have a request, Alessandro said, helping her back into her chair before returning to his own seat. I'd like us to start over in some ways. I'd like to court you again, but this time, as we truly are. No accommodations that aren't needed, no performances, just honest communication. I want to learn who you are when you're not hiding, and I want you to know me the same way. I'd like that, Valentina agreed, though I should warn you, I'm quite opinionated when I don't have to write everything down. You might find me exhausting. He laughed, the sound rich and warm. I'm counting on it. Over the following months, Alessandro and Valentina did exactly as he proposed. They courted publicly, letting Buenos Aires society see them as they truly were. Some whispered about the scandal of her deception, but others admired her courage in revealing the truth. Alessandro made it clear, through his attentions, that anyone who treated Valentina with anything less than full respect would answer to him. They walked through the city together, talking for hours. Alessandro took her to the new bookshops opening along Avenida de Mayo, where they debated literature and philosophy. They attended the opera at Teatro Colón, where Valentina finally heard the music she had only felt as vibrations for so many years. They shared mate in the Jardins de Palermo, watching the sunset paint the roses gold. Beatrice became a close friend to Alessandro as well, appreciating his genuine care for Valentina. She was instrumental in planning their wedding, which took place 6 months later in the spring of 1896. The ceremony was held in the gardens of the Rossi family's Recoleta mansion, under an arch covered in white roses and wisteria. Valentina wore a gown of ivory silk with lace that had belonged to her grandmother, her dark hair crowned with orange blossoms. She wore no hearing device, nothing to hide behind, just herself as she truly was. As she walked down the aisle between the rows of seated guests, she met Alessandro's eyes and saw in them everything she needed: love, respect, understanding, and acceptance. Not despite her flaws, not because of her former disability, but simply because of who she was. When they exchanged their vows, they did so in voices clear and strong, making promises they both intended to keep. Alessandro slipped a wedding band onto her finger, joining the emerald engagement ring, and Valentina did the same for him. "I love you," he whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife. "Exactly as you are." "I love you," she replied, her heart full. "Thank you for making me brave enough to be myself." Their kiss was met with applause and cheers from the gathered guests, as they turned to face their family and friends as a married couple. Valentina felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. She was seen, truly seen, and she was loved. The reception that followed was elegant and joyful. Music played, champagne flowed, and Valentina danced with her husband under the stars, the sounds of celebration surrounding them. She heard every note of music, every word of congratulation, every laugh and happy exclamation. And she was grateful for all of it, grateful for the ability to hear, but even more grateful for the courage she had found to stop hiding. As the evening grew late and guests began to depart, Alessandro and Valentina stood together at the edge of the garden, looking out over the lights of Buenos Aires spread before them. The city glowed in the darkness, a constellation of gaslights and early electric lamps, full of possibility and promise. "What are you thinking?" Alessandro asked, his arm around her waist. "I'm thinking about truth," Valentina said softly. "How frightening it is to be truly known, but how necessary. How lonely it is to hide, even when hiding feels safe. And how lucky I am that I found someone who made truth feel less terrifying than the alternative." "I'm the lucky one," Alessandro countered. "I found someone brave enough to show me her real self, even when it was hard. Even when it risked everything." Valentina leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of roses and night air. "We're both lucky then," agreed. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "What do you say we go inside? Our guests are leaving, and our life together is beginning." "Our life together," Valentina repeated, tasting the words. "I like the sound of that." They turned away from the view and walked back toward the mansion, toward their future, hand in hand. Behind them, the roses continued to bloom in the darkness, their perfumes sweet on the evening breeze. The city stretched out in all directions, full of people hiding and revealing, performing and being authentic, searching for connection in a world that often seemed designed to keep them apart. But Valentina and Alessandro had found each other through all of that, had chosen honesty over comfort, vulnerability over safety, love over fear. And in that choice, they had found something rare and precious: the freedom to be completely themselves and the joy of being loved for exactly who they were. The years that followed were not without their challenges. Marriage never is, especially between two strong-willed, intelligent people who were learning to navigate life together. There were disagreements and misunderstandings, moments when old fears resurfaced, times when Valentina felt the urge to retreat behind her old shields, or when Alessandro worried he wasn't enough. But they had learnt something valuable through their difficult beginning, that love wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. It was about choosing each other again and again, about speaking truth even when it was uncomfortable, about extending grace when mistakes were made. They built a life together in Buenos Aires, becoming known for their intellectual salons where artists, writers, and thinkers gathered to discuss ideas. Valentina discovered a passion for writing and began publishing essays on social reform, particularly advocating for people with disabilities to be treated as complete human beings rather than objects of pity. Alessandro supported her work fully, using his connections and resources to amplify her voice. They traveled together to Europe and beyond, always as equal partners. Valentina never pretended to be anything other than who she was, and she found that the world was kinder than she had feared when approached with confidence rather than deception. One evening, many years later, they sat together in the Jardins de Palermo, in the same secluded courtyard where Valentina had first confessed her truth. The roses were in full bloom again, the fountain burbling its eternal song. They were older now, silver threading through Alessandro's black hair, fine lines at the corners of Valentina's green eyes. But they were happy, deeply and genuinely happy. "Do you ever regret it?" Alessandro asked, his fingers interlaced with hers. "The path we took to get here?" "I know it was painful." Valentina considered the question carefully, looking back over the years. "I regret the deception," she said finally. "I regret the time I wasted hiding. But I don't regret where it led us. Because the pain taught us something important. It taught us that real love has to be built on truth, even when truth is difficult. It taught us that being vulnerable is the only way to truly connect. And it taught us that we're both strong enough to face hard things together." "Wise words," Alessandro said with a smile. "You should write them down." "Perhaps I will," Valentina replied, smiling back. "Perhaps I'll write our whole story down someday, as a testament to the power of choosing courage over comfort, truth over deception, love over fear. And what will you call this story?" Valentina thought for a moment, then laughed softly. "Something dramatic and honest. Something like, 'The Duke removed my hearing device to propose to me.'" But I could already hear. Alessandro laughed too, the sound carrying through the garden. "Perfect. Completely perfect. Just like you." "Not perfect," Valentina corrected gently. "Real. And that's better." "Yes," Alessandro agreed, pulling her closer. "That's infinitely better." They sat together as the sun set over Buenos Aires, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Two people who had learned the hard way that the most precious things in life, love and trust and true intimacy, could only be built on a foundation of honesty. They had found each other through deception and had chosen to rebuild through truth. And in that choice, they had discovered something more valuable than any secret, any shield, any protection. They had discovered freedom. The freedom to be completely, authentically themselves. The freedom to be loved for exactly who they were. The freedom to live without hiding, without fear, without the weight of pretense. It was the greatest gift they could have given each other, and it sustained them through all the years that followed, through every challenge and every joy, through every moment of doubt and every moment of certainty. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Buenos Aires, Valentina and Alessandro rose and walked home together, hand in hand, their steps in perfect sync. Behind them, the roses continued to bloom in the gathering darkness, bearing witness to their story, to the truth they had fought for, to the love they had chosen. And somewhere in the city, perhaps, another person hiding behind their own shields saw them pass and felt the first stirring of courage, the first whisper of hope that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to be seen and still be safe, to be known and still be loved, to remove the masks and find that what waited beneath was not rejection but acceptance, not judgment but grace. Because that was the true legacy of Valentina and Alessandro's story. Not just their own happiness, but the example they set for others. That authenticity, however frightening, was always worth the risk. That love, real love, could survive truth and become stronger for it. That the person we are when we stop performing is always, always enough.